2025 is almost here, and Calgary has changed so much in the past few years. If you are thinking about making a move to Calgary, but you're not sure if it's the right fit for you, well, in this video, I'll go over the real pros and cons of living in Calgary. No fluff, from someone who's born and raised here and has sold properties all over the city in the past 12 years. You might be surprised by what you'll learn. My name is Ryan Gillard at Real Broker, your Calgary realtor. And if you are thinking about making a move to Calgary or just exploring your options, I'm here to make the process as easy as possible for you. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out, whether it's about the real estate market or if it's about living in Calgary. I'd love to help you out. You could call, text, email, or comment. I will get it and get back to you. And I've also got some free resources for you, a buyer's guide, seller's guide, and a relocation guide, all free for download, and you can find them in the pinned comment or the written description. All right, let's go. All right, so first things first, why should you listen to me? There are lots of videos on this topic out there. But I would listen to myself because I am born and raised in Alberta, but I've lived all over this country. I've lived obviously in Calgary, in Vernon, BC. My dad used to own a car dealership there. He retired to Vancouver Island, so I go to BC quite often. I used to live in Vancouver and Burnaby when I went to university, and I also worked there. I've spent some time in the Army and lived in Winnipeg and the Maritimes. I've maybe done 5 or 6 trips to Toronto. So I've been all over this country. I've driven across from coast to coast. So I'm quite familiar with the country, and I can compare Calgary to different places throughout Canada. And one thing I'll also mention is that most people who are living in Calgary, they don't travel to every single neighborhood like a realtor does. They might live in Acadia and they might go downtown on the weekend and stuff like that, but they don't go to every single neighborhood of the city, every quadrant. And when I got licensed in real estate, I didn't realize how much of the city I didn't know. So working as a realtor for the past 12 years, I've seen every nook and cranny of Calgary, and I'll go all over the place. I'll go to all 4 quadrants, every neighborhood, and I'll sell all different product types. So I would say I'm quite familiar with the city, and I'm very qualified to go over the pros and cons of living in Calgary. And to make this video easier, I'm going to break it down into different sections. And the first section is the general quality of life in Calgary. Now, Calgary is typically voted as one of the most livable cities in the entire world. Lots of different publications always have in the top 10 or the top 15, along with Toronto and Vancouver. Now, if you are thinking about making a move and you're deciding on places like Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, I would still go with Calgary. I think it is more livable than Vancouver and Toronto. I like those cities. I have nothing against Vancouver. I think it's one of the most beautiful cities in the entire world. But unless you're extremely wealthy, it is not livable. Like if you want to buy a typical home in Vancouver, it's $2 to $3 million. So that just rules it out as a livable city in my opinion. Sure, it's very scenic, it's mild, it's beautiful, but it's just too expensive for the regular person out there. And Toronto's getting up there as well. Like I don't consider living in a 300 square foot condo that you paid $800,000 for as being livable. And Toronto is getting that way. It's very pricey, and Calgary has an advantage. It's still pricey compared to other markets in Canada, but it's not nearly as expensive as Vancouver and Toronto. And for that reason, I would say Calgary is more livable than those places. And the next point is that I love how scenic Calgary is. I could be driving around for work, showing properties and going on listing presentations, and I will routinely stop my car and take a photo or a video that I use for this YouTube channel. It is a very scenic location, Calgary. We've got the mountains, the foothills, the prairies, and they're all within like an hour radius of each other. The landscape changes quite often. It's just a very scenic location. Point number 3, this is a pro or a con, depending on how you look at it. I like how isolated Calgary's location is. It's not very populated and it's very isolated. We're so far removed from the world's problems that it becomes just a very peaceful location. If you look at what's happening in like the Russia-Ukraine conflict or the Middle East, like that stuff is like a world away from Calgary. It's just a very peaceful location. The drawback is if you want to go anywhere, it's a long flight. So it's maybe 3.5 hours to get to Toronto, probably the same to get to Los Angeles. You can fly direct Calgary to London, England. That's maybe like an 8 to 10 hour flight. So if you want to fly anywhere, it's a bit of a trek, but at the same time, I like how isolated we are. It's very stable and peaceful here. And the next point, along the lines of being a very peaceful location, we do have a low crime rate in Calgary. Now that said, we are getting to be a bit of a bigger city now. We're over 1.6 million people, I believe. So there are some issues that come along with a city of that size. But overall, Calgary is a very safe place. I will work or go to any quadrant in the city at any time, and I never worry about my belongings or getting stabbed or mugged. It just, I'm 43 now, and it's never happened to me my entire life. I simply don't even worry about it. Now, I've had a few comments about safety using the C-train line in Calgary. Now, I don't use the C-train every single day. Occasionally, I will use it, and I've never had any issues with it. But I think they are adding more security personnel to the C-train line and the stations. But still, overall, I think Calgary is a very safe location, and I haven't worried about crime at all my entire life here. So I think it's a very safe city, but one thing I have noticed is ever since COVID, there are more homeless, there are more drug-addicted people than ever before. I don't know what's causing it, but Calgary is still pretty good. I haven't seen any tent cities here yet. They have popped up in places like Edmonton, Vancouver, Toronto. I've even heard of some in the Maritimes, which is kind of bizarre to me. So this is an ongoing Canada-wide problem, but as of right now, I think Calgary is still pretty good, but I have noticed more and more of that ever since COVID. And the next point is a bit more obscure. I like how Calgary is one geographic unit. It's very manageable. Like if you're downtown, I can be at the airport in 20 minutes. I can be on the outskirts of the city 20, 30 minutes. It's easy to get around. And if you look at other cities that are much bigger, like Vancouver or Toronto, you have to cross multiple cities to get to places. It's more of a headache. It's more of a rat race. And I'll give you an example. When I finished university, I was living in Burnaby, BC, and I got a job downtown Vancouver. So I'd walk to the bus stop 20 minutes or whatever it is, an hour bus ride to get from Burnaby to downtown. Then you work from 8 to 7 or 8 to 8 or whatever it is, and do the same thing back. And your whole day would be in transit or work. And the rat race was very prominent. I hated my life when I was doing that in Vancouver. But in Calgary, it's a lot easier. It's just more manageable. We've got good infrastructure, good highways. I can be from the far northwest part of Calgary to the far southeast part of the city in less than an hour. It's more manageable. So it's kind of a hard point to understand, but I just find that the rat race is less prominent in Calgary. And the next topic is community and culture. Now, if you look at Canada as a whole, I would say that Alberta culture and politics is a bit different compared to other provinces. Now, some will hate the politics here, some will love it, but I would say overall, the people of Alberta and Calgary, it's a very can-do place. It's very optimistic, upcoming, and industrious. If you compare that with like the Maritimes, it's totally different. When I joined the military, I flew out to New Brunswick to do basic training, and New Brunswick was totally different than Alberta. It was kind of down and out. It's a bit depressing. There wasn't much going on. Very friendly people, but if you compare that with Calgary, it's so much different. There's more going on. There's always like new developments in Calgary. It's always growing. It's just more entrepreneurial and more of a business mindset than other parts of Canada. Now, I have nothing against the Maritimes. It's a very beautiful place, very friendly people, but it was just so different compared to Calgary. And next up, let's talk about friendliness. Now, Canada is a very friendly country, but if you move to Calgary, you'll be surprised at how friendly people are here. And if you rate the country in terms of the different areas, how friendly they are, I think if you were to poll most Canadians, they would say the Maritimers are the most friendly people. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, Newfoundland. And next up would be the prairie people, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, just very friendly. Next up would be Ontario, and then I think last place, in my opinion, would be BC and Quebec. Again, don't shoot the messenger, that's just my opinion. You can take it for what it is. But if you move here from a place like Vancouver or Toronto, you're like, whoa, people here are very friendly. So that's one good thing about living in Calgary, just the friendly people. And next point, there's more cultural diversity than ever before. Calgary's a growing city, and we're attracting people from all over the world and the country. And you can tell just by walking around how diverse it is. And this can be good in many ways. There's all sorts of new like restaurants popping up, like Libyan cuisine. I've even heard of that stuff before. But these places are always busy, so it's on my to-do list to try it out. All sorts of like Korean chicken and barbecue places. I've discovered birria tacos from Mexico. If you were to come to Calgary 10 years ago, it would be way different than it is right now. So there's more restaurant options. It's more of a lively place than it used to be. The one drawback to this is that sometimes I'll be driving around or walking somewhere and I don't even recognize the city at times. I feel like I'm in a foreign country at times. So we are growing rapidly, and maybe we're growing a bit too fast. But overall, I'd say, again, we're a very peaceful city and that everyone seems to get along in Calgary, but we are growing rapidly and we are very culturally diverse at this time. So our restaurant scene is growing. We are becoming more vibrant and diverse. I would say our nightlife scene is still sluggish compared to other places like Toronto or Vancouver. It's not terrible, but it's not nearly as lively as downtown Vancouver. We can be a bit of a ghost town in the downtown core after hours. It's more like a working area, 9 to 5, and then people move out to the suburbs. So we still have that problem in Calgary, but we are looking at ways to improve it. But as of right now, Vancouver's nightlife is way more lively compared to Calgary. We are a bit tame on that front. There are some lively areas in the Beltline or 17th Avenue, Kensington, but not nearly as good as it can be. So it is still a work in progress. That would be a negative thing about Calgary. Often I'll go to Kensington. That's one of the more lively spots in Calgary, but it's only like 3 blocks. It's not like going to Vancouver where you have 20 blocks of cool things. So we have ways to go on that front. And I'm assuming places like Montreal and Toronto are an improvement as well. And the next point, this is a bit of a drawback in that Calgary doesn't have that many major attractions outside of the Stampede or the outdoorsy activities like going to Banff and Kananaskis and stuff like that. We don't have like major amusement parks and like world famous museums and stuff like that. It is a bit of a work in progress. Like for example, I went to Minneapolis many years ago when I was living in Winnipeg in the Army. And they had the most amazing roller coaster rides I've ever seen in my entire life. Like these were for adults and they were massive. Like you don't see stuff like that in Calgary or like Canada's Wonderland or aquariums and stuff like that. So this is a bit of a drawback to living in the city. The Stampede's very fun, obviously, but that lasts 10 days out of the year. We have lots of outdoorsy activities, which are awesome, but we could still use some more major attractions within the city limits. And the next topic, and my favorite, is outdoor activities and lifestyle. Now, this is where Calgary really shines. And if you look at where Calgary is located, we're in a bit of a crossroads. We've got on the east of Calgary, we have the prairies and the Badlands are about 1 hour away. And on the western half of Calgary, we have the foothills and the mountains are 1 hour away. So it's just a very diverse setting, very scenic, and the landscape changes just so often. So it's a very strikingly beautiful location. And it's great for outdoors enthusiasts, especially in the mountains. So in the mountains, you've got some of the best skiing in North America. You've got Sunshine Village, 1.5 hours from Calgary. You have Lake Louise, is about 2 hours. Fernie is actually in BC, but it's only 3 hours from Calgary. And there are some others in there as well. There's cross-country skiing. Some of the best hiking in the world can be found around Calgary in the Kananaskis area, just like an hour drive from the city. Not far at all. You've got excellent dog walking paths, biking, jogging, running trails all throughout the mountains. In Calgary itself, we have a huge amount of park space. We must have, a couple hundred dog parks in the city. We've got parks like Fish Creek Park and Noah's Hill Park. Noah's Hill is the size of like a small city. It's a massive park. And there are parks all over the city. You've got connected green paths. You've got connected walking and running trails all throughout the city. It really is designed as a nature-first city, and again, there's just park space everywhere. It's the perfect city for an outdoors enthusiast. And one thing I like about Calgary is that it's always sunny here, especially if you come from Vancouver, where it's kind of mild and overcast quite often. It's almost always sunny here, and Calgary is also a very clean location. I think we're voted as the cleanest city in the world. I'm not sure how they track this, but there's also other places like Singapore and Tokyo are also very clean. So it's always sunny and it's also a very clean city. And moving along, the next topic is the economy and jobs. Now, this is generally a pro living in Calgary. Most of my adult life, Calgary has been booming. There are the odd exceptions here and there, but generally speaking, it's a good economy with strong corporate culture, lots of head offices in Calgary, and we are the center of Canada's energy industry. So that comes with lots of high-paying white-collar jobs in the oil sector. You've got engineers, geologists, pipeline designers, and stuff like that. You'll also find like corporate-type jobs like human resources, legal, banking, and insurance, and stuff like that. We're also big for agriculture and tourism, and we are a bit of a transportation hub as well. So we're not just about the oil and gas market, and we also have a bustling or booming tech sector as well. So things are changing in Calgary, but we are still kind of a boom and bust economy. And when the oil and gas market turns around, which it will at some point, You'll see lots of firings and layoffs like we did from 2015 to 2020. So it can still be a bit of a roller coaster here, but I think we are diversifying and we are more protected against those fluctuations. But overall, it's still a very great place to work, strong economy, lots of high-paying jobs, and that's definitely a pro living in Alberta. So the job market, it can fluctuate, but we still have a good GDP per capita in Calgary, and we've got low unemployment, and is generally a very optimistic place to live in terms of the economy. And next up, let's talk about the cost of living and real estate. And this used to be a big pro for Calgary. It used to be a very cheap jurisdiction to buy real estate. From 2015 to 2020, you could still find homes here, single-family homes in the $300,000 price range. Ever since COVID, our prices have really jumped, and now it's becoming an expensive city. But it depends where you're coming from. Calgary's more expensive than Winnipeg, the Maritimes, Edmonton, but it's still far cheaper than places like Vancouver or Toronto. So it is a pro and a con. It is getting expensive, but it's still cheaper than other parts of Canada. And I will get into the real estate prices coming up. And another good thing about Alberta specifically is that we don't have a provincial sales tax, so it makes shopping cheaper here. Other parts of Canada have a provincial sales tax or a harmonized sales tax, but that doesn't exist in Alberta. We just pay the GST, which is the federal sales tax. And another major benefit about living in Alberta is that we don't have a land transfer tax when buying real estate. So if you look at a place like Toronto, they match their provincial land transfer tax, and it's quite costly. If you were to buy a $1 million home in Toronto, which doesn't get you that much in that area, the land transfer tax is $25,000. That just goes to the government for providing not much from what I can tell. But if you buy a property in Calgary, say it's $1 million, you're just paying the legal fees, which are maybe $1,500 to $2,000 versus $25,000. It's beyond me how the government gets away with this in many jurisdictions in Canada, but in Alberta, we don't have this. And we're also near the bottom, if not the bottom, in terms of personal tax and corporate tax. So Alberta is just a cheaper place to live compared to other parts of Canada. And if you are interested in the cost of living in Calgary, I've got a video specifically on this topic where I go over all sorts of different things like utilities, rent, real estate, groceries, basically everything, and I give you a rundown of what things cost, and you can find a link to that video right here by clicking the link. Now this video is from 2023, the start of the year. I think it was in January of 2023. I am going to make a new one, but the costs, they haven't changed all that much, so it should still be pretty accurate. And I'll give you a bit more information about our real estate market and prices. So as of right now, it is October the 31st, 2024. Our total residential price is $596,900, up 5.5% year over year. Now, this is the average of single-family homes, duplexes, townhouses, and apartments. So as you can see, Calgary's not cheap. It is cheaper than Vancouver and Toronto, but it's still not a cheap jurisdiction. The average price for a single-family home right now is $757,100. That is up 8.8% year over year. For duplexes, we call them semi-detached here. Average price $678,400, up 9.5%. And for townhouses, the average price $459,200, up 10.2%. And lastly, condos, $345,000, up 13.9% year over year. And if we look at our real estate market, just the overall picture, our inventory is up almost 50% over last year. We were in some crazy seller's market conditions for the last few years, but now it's starting to level off, where we're seeing more inventory, and the months of supply is at 2.53. This is the stat where if nobody can list a property for sale, it would take 2.53 months to sell the remaining inventory. This number is still a seller's market territory. If this gets to 3 and 4, it's more of a balanced market. But what is concerning, though, is that this number is up 81.6% year over year. So while our market is still good right now, it does look to me like we are leveling off. So if you are thinking of coming to Calgary and buying and you're worried about our market getting too overheated, I think it might be cooling off a little bit. But it's still good at this time. It's just not as crazy as it was in the last few years. Some other real estate notes here. If you are thinking of renting, the average price of a one-bedroom here is about $1,500, and our vacancy rate is around 1% the last time I checked. So our rental market is pretty tight, and our rents have been going up, but I think that's kind of leveling off as well. And one thing I like about the Calgary real estate market is we have a lot of low-density options here, especially if you're coming from places like Vancouver and Toronto, where they have a lot of townhouses, a lot of condos. The single-family home is still the most popular option in Calgary. So you have low density, you've got large homes, garages, back alleys, and stuff like that. And a few things that I don't like about Calgary, in terms of walkability, the city is not, it wasn't designed for walking in mind. There are lots of walking trails and parks. It is a very park-friendly city, but it's not meant for like walking to work and stuff like that, unless you're like in the Beltline or parts of the inner city. It's definitely a car city, and it's not going to win too many awards for walkability. And the last thing I don't like about Calgary is that the suburbs all look the same to me. It seems like we have the same developers, they're doing the exact same layouts, the properties all look the same. In the newer areas, they're all two-story homes with a front attached garage, half bath on the main level, 3 bedrooms upstairs with an ensuite. So they're all identical. I think we need to have more creativity. And the next chapter is transportation and commuting. Now, I find if you talk to most people, they'll always say that their city has the worst traffic. But if they're saying that about Calgary, I would question it. I think Calgary is a very easy city to drive around in. If we look at other big cities like Vancouver, you're either behind a bus or you can't turn left. It's a very frustrating city to drive around in. The actual freeway doesn't even go into Vancouver. It goes through Burnaby to the North Shore. So you can't really drive that fast anywhere through the Vancouver city limits. I find it very frustrating. I'd say Edmonton is kind of similar to Calgary, but Winnipeg, I think it's a lot worse. I lived there for 3 years, and the traffic, they had some bad traffic. It was confusing. The roads were all kind of beat up. I'd say Calgary is a much easier place to drive around in than Winnipeg. Ottawa has been known to be confusing. I haven't spent too much time in Ottawa. Toronto has legendary, terrible traffic. And I think Montreal is kind of confusing. I got so lost driving through it. So if you are thinking about moving to Calgary, the commute time is not that bad. It's a very easy city to drive around in. And a good chunk of the city is actually in a grid-like format. So avenues go east-west, streets go north-south, and it's quite easy to get around. 1st Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Ave, 4th Ave, very simple. And it's a newer city, so we've got good infrastructure, good highways, and connecting roads. I find it pretty easy compared to most places in Canada. And some points on driving around. I find driving around in the winter, I don't trust other drivers. It can be kind of annoying driving around in the winter. You get chipped windshields from the gravel we put on the roads. That's very common. And changing your tires over to winter tires. These things are all kind of annoying, but in most places in Canada, you have to do this anyway. So that's not a Calgary-specific problem. Let's talk about urban sprawl. Calgary covers a massive geographic area. It's huge. To go from northwest Calgary to the deep southeast, it might be like 50 kilometers or more. It's a huge area. So a car makes life much easier in Calgary. And next up, let's talk about the airport. So Calgary is a bit of a transportation hub. So we do have a lot of direct connections from Calgary. You can go to most places in the States, Mexico. I've been direct to London, England, direct to Tokyo. So I think our airport is quite good, but there are some locations, if you want to get to them, you have to stop in places like Vancouver is very common, Toronto, or maybe places like Denver, Atlanta. So it is good. There's lots of direct connections or direct flights from Calgary, but connecting in other cities like Vancouver can be a bit annoying. But these are like first world problems. It's not the end of the world to connect in Vancouver for 2 hours and go somewhere else. And one thing I don't like about the Calgary airport is that we can't seem to figure out how to get the C train to connect to the airport. It seems like it would be so easy to me, and you'd make a lot of money, and it would benefit the public. But for whatever reason, we just can't seem to make it happen. Next up is the LRT system, public transit. Now, Calgary does get criticized for its LRT system. I think it's actually pretty good, though. If you look at other Canadian jurisdictions, it's not bad at all. Maybe not as good as Vancouver. It's definitely not as good as places in Europe or Asia, but it does cover a huge chunk of the city, and we're always adding to it. But the Green Line, when operational, it will add stops from the deep southeast part of the city to downtown, and then it'll go into the deep north central part of the city. And the last point here about transportation, it seems like we have an extended winter, and then it's construction season, and there's construction absolutely everywhere, which can be annoying. And the next chapter, weather and geography. Now, most of these points are negative. Calgary's not going to win too many awards for our weather, but we're not the hottest jurisdiction. We're not the coldest, but I'd say we're up there in terms of how unpredictable we are. Maybe there are places in Newfoundland that might be as unpredictable, but Calgary, it can be hot one day, cold the next day, and there's a joke that you can see all 4 seasons in one day in Calgary. And I think that can be true, especially in the shoulder months where it can be like plus 25 one day and then it can snow the next. I've seen snowstorms in May, I've seen them in September, and it's just a more unpredictable location. And I've got a lot of points here, and the first one here, I think I already mentioned this, Calgary's a very sunny location. The prevailing trend here, bright blue skies, it can be a bit windy, but it's always very sunny though. We've also got a very dry climate. It's tough on your skin. So in the wintertime, your hands will crack, you'll get nosebleeds. Very dry location. I wish it rained more often, but when it does rain here, it's typically in July during the Calgary Stampede, and we'll get vicious thunderstorms, hailstorms. The hail can shred properties. I've had hail damage to my car. I've listed properties and sold them, and before possession, they were shredded by hail. So hail is a big problem here, specifically in the northeast part of the city and Airdrie. It seems to get hit harder in those jurisdictions. But it's very common here. Every summer, there's multiple hailstorms, thunder showers, and even tornadoes are common in southern Alberta. And one thing I hate about Alberta is how windy it is. I think the prairie provinces, I think they're typically sunny and windy. That's like the prevailing trend. And I can't stand how windy it is. So I'm a golfer, and I can be golfing and aiming like one fairway to the left or the right to compensate for the wind. And that's just the way it is here. It can be a windy place. And let's talk about the Chinooks. This is a peculiar thing about southern Alberta. So what this is, and I'm by no means a meteorologist, this is just a rough explanation of what I think is happening, is you get a warm, moist air coming from the Pacific Ocean, and it hits the west side of the Rocky Mountains, like in the Vancouver area, and it rains like crazy over there. The hot air rises, and then it comes down to the east side of the Rocky Mountains, and that warm air can flow into southern Alberta, and it can legit raise the temperature from say minus 20 to like plus 15 in a matter of hours. So this is a very strange phenomenon, but it does break up the winter. Like it can be minus 40 for a few days, and the Chinook rolls in, and things are totally different in a matter of hours. And these Chinooks come in routinely during the winter time. So they are very common. But the one drawback to Chinooks is that they do have wild pressure swings, and some people get migraines from these Chinook patterns. I actually had one client from Ontario they bought 2 years ago, and the Chinooks were so bad for them in terms of migraines, they actually moved back to Ontario for this reason. And the next point is elevation. So what I don't like about living at elevation is that it gets cold at night, even in the summertime. The temperature just drops off a cliff, it seems like, when it gets dark here. So that affects the temperature. You can also get more sunburnt easily at elevation with the thinner air. And oddly enough, you actually, if you're drinking wine or alcohol, it does hit you harder as well, being at elevation. One very annoying thing about living in Calgary, especially in the summertime, is all the forest fire smoke from the Rocky Mountains, from British Columbia, even places in California and Montana. It seems to flow right into Calgary. And this wasn't much of a problem until the last 5 years. For whatever reason, I think the forests are all overgrown, and they're all like tinder boxes, and they go up in flames quite easily. And the forest fire smoke can be very, very annoying in Calgary. And the next point, which I'm not much of a fan of, is the shoulder season here, like the spring and the fall. Sure, we've got a long winter and a short summer, but our fall months, I think, are the worst in my opinion. We've got a very short spring. It just kind of stays winter until it's the summertime. And our fall, it goes by like that, like 2 weeks of nice colors, and then it's just like full on winter. And it's very brown and gross, not a very lush location in terms of greenery. I just wish we had like 4 seasons that are all 3 months long. Would be a bit nicer than having a long winter and a short summer. And the next point, it gets miserably cold here. It can get down to minus 40 in Calgary, and you don't want to be outside for too long in that type of weather. And that's not that normal though. I'd say once or twice every winter it gets down to minus 40. But if it's a seasonal day, it could be bright and sunny and like minus 5, minus 10, which is very doable. But when it gets down to minus 40, which does happen, it can be quite miserable. And the last point here, which I find kind of annoying about living in Calgary, is that it gets cold at night. Now this can be good when you're trying to sleep, but if you're going out somewhere, maybe for patio drinks, you'll be shocked at how cold it gets, even in the summertime at nighttime. And the last section here is the schooling options. Now I get asked quite often, where are the best schools in Calgary? I would say, generally speaking, most of the best schools are located on the west side of Calgary or in the inner city. And those are just the more expensive areas. But I'd be perfectly comfortable if I had kids to let them go to any of the public options throughout Calgary. We've got a strong public and private school system, excellent options for higher education with places like the U of C, SAIT, and Mount Royal. Most schools have huge fields, park areas, skating rinks in the winter, tennis courts, baseball diamonds, uprights for football, and I'd say Calgary is just a very family-friendly location. Well, there you have it. That's the pros and cons of living in Calgary. If you have any questions at all about living in Calgary or Calgary real estate, feel free to give me a call, shoot me a text, send me an email. I'd love to help you out. I've also got those free resources in the pinned comment or written description, a buyer's guide, seller's guide, or a relocation guide. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.